Welcome everyone to another episode of Veteran Insights. Today we have another Vietnam veteran. Is it Master Sergeant?
Senior Master. Senior Master.
Stan Nielsen. Welcome to the show.
Yes.
Hey Stan, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Oh, great. So tell me a little bit about yourself, Stan. Where were you born? And
Yeah, I was born in a small farming resort community in west central Minnesota, a little town called Pelican Rapids. It's gotten bigger since I left, but I left January of 1960 because the temperatures were 35 below zero, and I was tired of the cold weather. So a friend of mine who I was talking to in a construction site, I said, we need to go someplace where it was warm. And he said, where would that be? And I said, Texas. He said, well, what would you do in Texas? He said, well, let's go in the Air Force. So next day, we were down at the recruiter's office in my county seat. And then 2 days later, we were on our way to Lackland Air Force Base. I spent a month there at Lackland in basic training, and then I went to Shepherd Air Force Base for more basic training and helicopter school. That's when I first found out I was going into helicopters. So went through helicopter school there from I think it was March, 1st of March until mid-July. And then my class mostly went to the northern tier bases, and two of us went to stayed in Texas. We went to San Angelo, Texas, which is way out in West Texas. And I was in a balloon chasing outfit. We had 4 H-21s, a Goody Bird, and an L-20. So when I started flying in June of '61, we had the flight mechanic always flew the left seat of the helicopter, you know.
Yep.
So there was just a pilot and a mechanic, and then the recovery guys in the back. So I ended up learning how to fly a helicopter. You know, they said because the pilot said they need relief now and then for because some of those flights were 3 and 4 hours long, you know, and then we chased these balloons. They're high altitude air sampling balloons, and they wintertime, they went east into East Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, as far as Alabama. And in the summertime, they went out into way out in West Texas and New Mexico and into Arizona. You know, so yep. Those flights were long, and spent some long days. But we had to launch four wet sample balloons and 4 dry sample balloons, and they were. Of course, at that time, they were doing above-ground nuclear testing, so these samples were air samples taken at anywhere from 70 to 100,000 feet, and they would pull the air in, and we'd pull them through. Dry ones went through filters, and the wet ones went into a armored vessel, and we got the bag on the ground, and we pumped the air out of there into high-pressure bottles, and it was all sent to the Atomic Energy Commission.
Risky business, though, flying through nuclear clouds.
Yeah, I had one engine failure. Well, it almost failed on us. We got it on land in time, and then but we had to change the engine out there in the plowed field.
Yep.
in January.
Sure. So you flew Goony Birds. You flew helicopters. What helicopters were around back in 1961?
It was a CH-21. It had the same engine the B-17s had, 1820.
Okay.
But they were modified for helicopter use.
Sure. And how long did you stay in the Air Force for?
Well, I was in for 21 years. I went to spent 5 years in Texas, and then I went to Spain for 3 years. We got involved in the recovery of those H-bombs that dropped in Palomares. And then I came back to Texas for a year a local base rescue unit, and then I got an assignment in '69. I got an assignment to Southeast Asia, Tanzania first, and then they changed my assignment to go to Udon, Thailand, flying on the H-53. And so I had to go to England to get my aircrew training down here. So I was there August to December. I had to go through survival school in Washington State. And then en route to Southeast Asia, I had to go to jungle survival in the Philippines. We spent several nights out in the jungle, and from there I ended up then we went to Udon, and I was started flying at Udon about mid-January of 1970. And I spent a year there. It was our unit went after pilots that got shot down in Laos. Most of our missions were in Laos, but we had some in North Vietnam, and our worst areas was the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We had a lot of helicopters tore up there and shot up real bad. And like I say, one of those was Boxer 22, and that was a month before I got there. And then in March of '70, we had another one went down in the same area, but this was called it was Wolf 06. And again, we rescued. The one was captured, and the other one was rescued. So. They may have come out of the same airplane, but like in Boxer 2-2, they killed one and we rescued the other one.
Sure.
And
so that was from Udon Air Base?
Yeah, Udon Royal Thai Air Force Base. Yeah, Udon was the home of the 555th Tactical Fighter Squadron, and Bob Hope called it the world's largest distributor of MiG parts. So,
of course he did, and it was true.
Yeah, yeah.
So, a mission. How did it work when they found that you would have been on standby? I would assume.
When an aircraft got shot down, when the pilot bailed out, there was a beeper. And this beeper came over guard, and you knew there was somebody that went down somewhere.
Sure.
And so usually, if the person had a wingman, he'd stay there as on-scene commander until some of the rescue forces arrived. Normally, it would be like one OV-10 and a couple of A-1 Skyraiders, and they would ascertain what the opposition was there, as far as your big anti-aircraft guns, your small arms fire from the ground forces there, and they would kind of troll the area to see where they could pick up ground fire from, and then they would locate that. And on McGee Pass on the Ho Chi Minh Trail there, it would be a couple of days before they'd bring the helicopter in there, because it was so dangerous because of the number of anti-aircraft guns. When you went into McGee Pass, there's high rock formations on both sides of the pass. There's a river that runs through it, and they would be shooting at you from the high karst areas. They'd be shooting down at you. We had helicopters that came back with holes from the right to the left, left to the right, from the front to the back, and back to the front, up through the belly. They'd come back with maybe a couple of hundred holes through them, and we had one that came back, a 37 millimeter, hit it in the belly, opened the floor up about 4x4 hole in the floor. But they brought it back, and so it was a pretty tough helicopter. But there were times when we did have one shot down.
Sure. So you would. I've seen many photos of helicopters going out to rescue with a couple of Skyraiders with them.
Yeah.
And when the Skyraiders could loiter for quite a while, couldn't they?
Yeah, they would circle. Yeah, and when they got ready for the pickup, they determined that it was ready, that it was safe enough to go in there. There would be one Skyraider and he'd lead the helicopter, and the helicopter would follow him and pass right over the survivor. Well, the Skyraider pilot would then tell the survivor on the ground, "Pop your smoke."
Yep.
And he carried a Mark 13, and you pop the day side of that smoke, and it would let out a bright crimson red smoke. And so when you saw that with a jungle background, I mean, it stood out right away. I mean, you couldn't miss it. And so we'd home in on that smoke, and to lower the hoist to. On my rescue, it was an F4 Phantom. They got shot down on the PDJ in northern Laos, and they worked that area. They got shot down about 2 in the afternoon. 37 millimeter hit it at 6,000 feet, and they bailed out. And then the A1 that was up there that was looking the area over for enemy opposition, he got shot down. So now we had three people on the ground. So they worked on trying to get that A1 pilot picked up. They rescued him after sunset. It was dark, and they rescued him then. And then the next morning they did what they call a first light. And the first helicopters took off at sunrise, and they went up there. I was on home alert, low bird home alert, and they launched us about 10 o'clock in the morning. And we went up, and we were orbiting up there. And then at noon, we became the primary rescue choppers. And so we would be the first ones to go in when they determined it was safe enough. And so they worked the area over. They laid CBU, which is a little cluster bombs. They were anti-personnel. And, they were knocking out troop concentrations and stuff like this. And they were working the anti-aircraft guns over because there were 37 millimeters in the area. And then about 2:15 or so in the afternoon, they determined that it was ready to run a helicopter in there, So
sure.
We made our run in, and we followed the A1 Skyraider. And when he told us to kill off our airspeed, I kicked the penetrator out the door and lowered the hoist. These were hydraulic operated hoists, and when you went full down, it went down 200 feet a minute. And as we were approaching the survivor, I saw the red smoke. As we were coming in over towards him, I was lowering that hoist, the force penetrator, which had 3 fold-out seats and a strap that you wrapped around you, and I lowered it as I was coming in. It was getting lower and lower, and I dropped it right at the pilot's feet. All he had to do was bend over and pick it up. And I started bringing him up. And as I was bringing him up, our co-pilot saw the other guy about a quarter mile at our 10, 11 o'clock position. So he started doing a side hover over to where he was. I couldn't see him yet because I was on the right-hand side of the helicopter, and got the alpha pilot. The alpha was the pilot itself, and the backseater was the weapons systems officer. And we came into our, and I saw the red smoke, so I started lowering the hoist to the red smoke, and all of a sudden, as I was getting the hoist down to where that red smoke was, I saw this guy uphill from us, about 100 feet uphill from us. Initially, I thought it was a bad guy, but turned out to be the guy we were after. So I had to talk the pilot uphill to where to get the hoist to that backseater, and got him on the hoist. And as we was bringing him up, he swung the nose around to the left, and we started making our run out the egress, out the area through the. We came up a strong river stream valley, a bed, and we went out through there, and then we joined up with all the SAR force, the rest of the SAR force, and we flew back to Udorn, and they briefed us. We had to go through debriefing and all that. And one of the guys on the other helicopter, he said, "Did you see that 37 millimeter shooting at you?" And I said, "No, I didn't see no gun shooting at us." He said, "Oh," he says, he was firing on you, and I said, "How many rounds did you get off?" And he said, "I got about 4." And he said, I said, "Well, how close was he getting?" He said, "If you'd got another 3 rounds off, he'd have got you." So
Oh, great news.
that was. But the A1 saw the muzzle flash, and he went in and dumped a load of ordnance on him and
Yep.
took that gun out. So we made it out of there safely. But the A1s were, I mean, they would get right down into the treetops with us, and they did what they some of those missions they did what they called a daisy chain. There'd be 2 A1s on the right side of the helicopter and 2 on the left, and they would be opposite each other, flying in a circle. When one was diving on the ground, and the other one was climbing out, so they were 180 degrees apart from each other, and they were, while we were in a hover there, they would be cycling these. The 2 A1s would be, firing on the opposition, because sometimes those enemy forces would be right out there in plain open daylight, and we had J.C. Corcoran was one of our engineers, and he came into a hover on the Boxer 2-2 mission, and helicopter came to a hover. He said about 40 or 50 troops stood up out of this trench and started firing on him, and well, he had that minigun, the Gatling gun in place, and he just took the minigun. You hit the right trigger, it goes 2,000 rounds a minute. You hit the left trigger, it goes to 4,000. So it goes into overdrive, and he just hit the right trigger and hit the left trigger, and he mowed them all down. I mean, within about 3 seconds, he took them out. So yeah, that minigun was definitely an anti-personnel weapon. It could put out some firepower. We had an F4 that got shot down in Bartholomew Pass, and that is right on the North Vietnamese border. If you look at the map, you'll see what looks like a fish's mouth. We called it the fish's mouth when they said that. Everybody knew where it was at. This F4 got hit, and the cockpit it literally exploded. It blew the backseater out. The front seater went in with the airplane, and so he was killed in action, and we got launched up there. I was Hybrid that day, and we went up there, and we were orbiting and waiting for them to give us clearance to go in there and pick the guy up. Well, we topped our tanks off from a tanker, and the front, the low bird there was, he lost part of the second stage tail rotor hydraulics, so he had to RTB and back. He went back, so we had to wait there for our another helicopter to come up. Well, we were Hybrid then. We became low bird when he went back. So when our Hybrid came in, when he got a replacement helicopter crew come up there, we orbited for a while, and then they sent us in on for the pickup. And I remember it looked like we crossed into part of North Vietnam, and we came in. We passed over some ridge lines. We were helicopter doing 170 knots, which is close to 200 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. We when we came to a ridge line, we'd pull, skim over the ridge line, dive down the backside, and then we'd go through another valley and come up over another ridge line, back down. So we were going up and down these, trying to hug the terrain going in. And this guy was, he was down on the south side of Route 7, but he landed at the base of a karst rock formation. And this rock formation went vertical for about 700-800 feet. And he was on the down, there was a sloping side to that karst, and he was down on the slope part. So we came into a hover, about a 75-foot hover, and we were facing the karst, and the helicopter was pointed right at the karst. Rotor blades were probably 40, 50 feet from the karst itself. And then the pilot did a pedal turn to the left. And so now the karst was on the right side. And that's when the ground fire opened up. They opened up on us from the 4 or 5 o'clock position and from straight underneath us. And our tail gunner, he took a round, come through the side of the fuselage, and the round hit him in his parachute, knocked him kind of to his right, which minigun pointed to the right side of the helicopter out the tail, and that's when he opened up. And it looked like a sickle going through a hayfield, just mowing all the vegetation down. And there was I saw red and green tracers coming out. So there was we were in a running gun battle there with him, and I'm looking out the door. I got the hoist out on the cable about halfway or more down, and I've got it, but I don't see any red smoke. So I had him. I told him I cleared him to back the helicopter up about 50, 60 feet. And we're looking, and I can't see nothing. So I had him move left. And that was 20 or 30 feet, and I couldn't see anything, and moved back forward. Couldn't see anything, and so the aircraft commander told the number one PJ to come over and help us look. So there's two of us hanging out, bent over looking down and below the helicopter to see if we could see the red smoke. And, had him back the helicopter up again. And all this time, our tail gunner, he is, that minigun is still going, and he's firing away, and we made another circuit around, and no smoke, whatsoever. And I told Major, the aircraft commander, I says, we don't see any red smoke. I have no idea where he's at. And so he just kind of left pedal and left stick, and we slid off the side of that slope, went back down the way we came in, and we'd taken a lot of hits because I saw bullet holes. I looked back in the cabin toward the tail gun, and you could see holes appearing in the floor coming forward. And when I seen the main tank, our main tanks were self-sealing, and I could see holes appearing in the main tank, but the drop tanks, they weren't self-sealing. You could bore a hole in there, it leaked. Those tanks were 450-gallon tanks, so the drop tanks were. Anyway, we made it back out there. A1 was escorting us, and he flew along with us going out there, and we climbed up to 8,000 feet, and A1 came up on our side, and he kind of slipped underneath us. He looked up, and he was kind of giving us a battle damage where, what we had leaking in the fuel. He said, you got fuel and hydraulic fluid pouring out, and we called for a tanker because we didn't have enough fuel in our main tanks to make it to a friendly site. And so, about 15 minutes or so, here come the tanker in there, and he slipped into as the tanker was coming in, he was reeling his hoses in and out to get him exercise. We were at 8,000 feet, and he cleared us to go ahead. He cleared us to go ahead and refuel, and the AC, he pulled in and put the probe right in the drogue right on the first try, and I told him, I said, I'm going to fill the main tanks up because our drop tanks are full of holes. And so I turned I had the master power switch on. I flipped both the main tank switches on, and I left the drop tank switches off. And then we got to start getting fuel, and I look, all four tanks are filling up, and I can't control that. I can't shut it off, and we can't close the rear ramp and door because all the hydraulics to those doors they've been shot. The hydraulic lines have been shot too. That's where all the hydraulic fluid is pouring out from. And so I told one of the PJs, I said, grab my vice grips, go back there and pinch those lines off. So he was back there pinching those lines off, and when the drop tank, when it filled up, it was shooting a rooster tail of fuel. The A1 and said, man, you got a rooster tail, a 30, 40-foot rooster tail, just fuel just shooting straight up in the air. And the low pressure area behind the helicopter, it was sucking all that vaporized fuel into the cabin. I looked back, I couldn't see the PJs back there. It was just a fog of jet fuel. So we had to call I told the pilots, tell the tanker, shut the fuel off. And I said, you need to stay hooked up because you're just going to have to plug in again when their main tank level drops because the engines feed out of the main tanks. So we stayed hooked up to the tanker, and when our fuel got down to about 400, 500 pounds, we'd say, okay, give us some more fuel, and they'd throw some more fuel to us. And then we start getting that fog of fuel again. So we have to shut the fuel off. So we stayed hooked up to that tanker for about 40 minutes or so until we got to this friendly side of northern Laos. And we were still over Laos. And we disconnect from the tanker and we dropped straight down into that Longchen valley there. It was in mountains on both sides and karst on the end of the runway and all that. We landed there and taxied in, and of course we were leaking fuel everywhere we went. The fuel was pouring out of those drop tanks, and so they told us to taxi to another place. And the Laotians come out there with these small hoses, and they was catching the fuel that was draining out of the drop tanks, running beside the helicopter. And anyway, we finally got the thing parked and we got it shut down, and then we looked around and we did a kind of a battle damage assessment on that thing, and we had 57 holes in the belly and throughout the tank. Some of the rotor blades had holes in them, and the right-hand drop tank near the aft end of the drop tank had about a 6-inch opening in the top of the tank, and that's where the tank filled up, it blew that fuel. The excess fuel went out through that hole, and it was streaming, behind us, So
very disconcerting
anyway,
having fuel everywhere.
Pardon?
I said it would have been very disconcerting having fuel everywhere. One spark.
Yeah. And our aircraft commander was back there on the ramp, and I looked up, and there's a wire bundle over the aft ramp. There's a wire bundle that's severed in two. All it would take was just a spark from that thing, and because our sister ship, I talked to the aircraft commander on that here at one of the last reunions we had. And he found out I was on that helicopter, and he says, "Yeah," he said, when we saw that fuel coming out, we moved about a half mile away from you. We thought you were going to blow up, and yeah, it was bad. But that helicopter that I was on, it was the first flight after it came out of repair for that hole that got blown in the belly. That's the one that got a hole in the belly from that 37 millimeter hit. And of course, first flight after it got all repaired, it got full of holes again, So we nicknamed it Patches. That particular helicopter now is sitting in a mountain pass in Afghanistan somewhere. When we got back to in that Longchen, that base up there, still in Laos, Major Burke, the aircraft commander said, "Did you put the penetrator in the trees?" And I said, "No." I said, "I couldn't see anything. I couldn't see any smoke or anything." And I said, I didn't want to drag a Gomer out of I didn't want to drag a bad guy out of the jungle and him start shooting at us,
Yep.
And so he that next day when we talked to the pilot that got rescued, he said, asked us he asked him who was on that first helicopter, and we said, well, we were, he said, "You couldn't hear me telling you to get out of there? It was a trap." He said, "No, we couldn't hear a thing, we couldn't hear anything, and he said, "Yeah," he says, "When you came into a hover, two guys jumped me, and he shot one of them right through the head, and he threw it, but he threw his smoke down here. I think he shot the other one too, but he threw his smoke down the hill or further down the side of that slope."
Yep.
And he dove into a depression and hit himself. And he said, "I was trying to tell you to get out of there, And the interesting thing I found out that this pilot that was rescued, he was rescued later that night by our Highbird crew, and he got shot down a year later in Cambodia again. And so he was down twice within a year, and he was rescued again by the 40th. So he was rescued twice. So that guy his name was Captain Dotson, and he was pushing his luck.
Yep.
So,
He would have been. And
but
so
that's what they tried to do. They would try to lay a trap to bring as many aircraft in as they could to shoot them down.
Mm-hmm. And you were at Udon Air Base. You also were over at other air bases there too, in Thailand. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
What other bases were you based at?
Well, we had when I initially got there, we sent 2 helicopters north to this Lima site up in northern Laos. They'd spend all day alert up there. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they'd go orbit. And then at NKP, we had 2 helicopters there for 3 days TDY. And on the 3rd day, they would take off about 3 o'clock in the afternoon and go orbit the southern panhandle of Laos from about 3 o'clock until about 5:30, quarter to 6,
Mm-hmm.
when the strikes were over. And then when the Cambodian conflict started in 1970, we sent 2 of them to Ubon, Thailand.
Yep.
And that was south, down toward the Cambodian border. And so yeah, we had 3 different. And then we also had home alert at Udon itself. We kept two helicopters there on strip alert. And in fact, both my missions in Laos we launched from Udon in June of 70, June 20th of 1970. There was an OV-10 that went down on the PDJ again, and this was a single pilot, and he bailed out and he landed on a high ridge line that was covered with elephant grass. And Air America tried to go in there and pick him up, and they got shot up. And then there was another helicopter that tried to make a attempt at him, and he got shot up. And so then, we were on our way up there while all this was going on, and they cleared they told us, okay, we're made to make a run in on this. We came in from the east. We went over number 1, 2, 3. He was on the 4th ridgeline, right almost at the very top.
Sure.
He was just a little below. He was just a little bit below the top of the ridgeline there, and we came over those 3 ridgelines. Got to the 4th ridgelines. He did a swung up and pedal turn to the left, and I saw the guy right away. He didn't even need to pop his smoke, and I run the hoist down to him, and he hooked. He got on board. He got on the penetrator, but he dragged up all kinds of elephant grass with him. Mm-hmm. We brought him up, and he he wasn't hurt or nothing like that. So yeah, that was we did take some ground fire from our 9 o'clock position, I should say. And when we left the area, I would get my minigun in place, and I'd start hosing down the areas in front of the helicopter off to the right side, to keep heads down while we were egressing, because some of our helicopters were hit when they were egressing after a pickup, so it was a constant gunfight.
Well, they should have called you the gunfighters.
Pardon?
They should have called you the gunfighters.
Yeah.
In Da Nang, yeah.
Yeah. But those miniguns on our helicopter, they were lifesavers. In fact, on that last mission, that one mission I had on June 20th, I got the gun in place. I started firing it, and I got the gun going, and it started firing, and all of a sudden it just abruptly stopped. I didn't release the trigger; it just stopped on its own, And no sooner had that gun stopped, an A1 flew up was coming down on our right side. He crossed right in front of where I had the gun pointed, and he fired a series of flechette rockets. I could see the flames coming out from under the wing, and as he flew by us, and these flechette rockets were 2.75-inch rockets that had these steel darts in them.
Yep.
A 2.75-inch rocket had 2,000 little flechette. They were real sharp. They had fins on the back, and they were hard steel, and they would go through a tree or whatever. It was like a flying shotgun, except that we had a 2.5-inch barrel, because that rocket would go down the proximity fuse. It would discharge that like a shotgun. It would discharge these flechettes out in a cone, and it was an anti-personnel weapon. And if that gun wouldn't have stopped at that instant moment, I would have raked he would have flown right through my minigun fire. And when we got back to Udorn, because when you let the trigger go, the gun empties itself.
Yep.
Well, this thing didn't empty itself. It was jammed solid. I couldn't rotate the barrels or nothing. So when we got back to Udorn, I told the gun shop, I said, that gun jammed on me. It's still loaded, and I couldn't unload it. I took the feeder delinker off, but I said, there's still ammo in that gun, because I couldn't rotate the barrels. You can rotate it when you take the feeder delinker off. You can rotate the barrels by hand. And I said, this thing is locked solid, And what they found was there was a small, tiny set screw that had vibrated loose and dropped into the drive gear of the electric motor that turned the rotor on the minigun and locked it up.
Yep.
And it happened just at that time when A1 flew right by our. He was probably 40 feet out from our rotor tips. That's how close he was, because his wingspan filled up the whole doorway.
Sure.
Flew by.
He didn't get shot down.
Yeah, he would have, because it would have raked the top of that A1. He wasn't. The airplane wasn't side to us; it was winged over like this.
Yep.
When he flew across our nose, he was in kind of going down at an angle. And boy, I thought about that, and I thought to myself, "Oh man, the miracles do happen, And it just, the gun. That's the only time I ever had a malfunction like that with that gun. Never had them, because those guns were so reliable.
Yep.
I never had one that jammed up like that.
How many rounds did you have on the plane? How many would you carry?
Each gun had 3,000 rounds, and we were up there one day in northern Laos, and the gun shop, because when the ammo sat in the guns too long, they start turning green from the moisture and the humidity and all that. So they would say, when you're done orbiting, go Winchester your guns, which we knew meant empty them out.
Yep.
So what we did was they told me on mine, they said, fire yours at 4,000 rate until the Winchester. I said, okay. And the tail, all three guns were going, and I'll tell you what, that is loud. If you have earplugs, you have your helmet on, your ears are still, it's still a roar, And anyway, I emptied that gun in 45 seconds. It emptied it's a 3,000 round can. These miniguns, there was a booster motor on top of the ammo can.
Yep.
And when you hit the right trigger, that booster motor kicked in first. So it put a back pressure, in other words, like a water hose pressure. It pushed the ammo it pulled it out of the ammo can, pushed it to the gun feeder, the linker motor. And you had to be careful, because to arm the gun, the pilot had to turn the master power, the weapons power system, and then that was wired through a micro switch on where the gun mount swiveled into the door. There was a pin that went into a fitting, and underneath on the bottom side of that fitting was a micro switch. So when that micro switch was depressed, it completed the circuit to the power switch on the gun. When you flip that on, it provided power to the right trigger. When you squeeze the right trigger, it provided power to the left trigger. So then you went right trigger 2,000 rate, you get the barrels going. Then you hit the left trigger, it goes to 4,000 rate. so it pours the ammo out, you know.
Sure.
And each barrel is good for 100,000 rounds.
Sure.
You know,
So how many
yeah.
how many missions did you end up flying?
Well, let's see. I had 1, 2, 3. I made 3 pickups. I got shot off that one. I was on Wolf 06, Hobo 52. But on Hobo 52, that was an A1 that went down, and a helicopter from Da Nang, H3 from Da Nang, picked him up.
Sure.
And
but overall, during your time in Vietnam, how many did you do a tally of missions? How many missions would you have flown?
well, every time we crossed the border, it was a mission. I had 126 missions, 300 and some combat hours. You know, because every time you cross the fence, that was you got credit for one mission.
Sure.
And we for 20 missions, you were submitted for the air medal.
Okay. Well,
And,
you would have had a couple of those.
Oh yeah. I can show them there. Take them around.
Well, that looked pretty impressive.
Yeah, we had we flew, and then we also flew pigs and people missions. I was scheduled one day for my boss told me, he said kind of briefed me on these pigs and people's mission, you know. So we went up there and this was way up in northern Laos again. There was a high mountain Lima site that was in danger of being overrun by North Vietnamese, and the Royal Laotians, which were the friendly Laotians, they were in a locked battle with the North Vietnamese, and of course they had American F4s and fighters going up there, you know, supporting the Laotians up there with special force. They had special forces advisors with them, and that anyway. They had this runway carved out of the side of a mountain. This is about the 3,500, 4,000 foot level. And you could land a STOL aircraft in there. It was a short runway, but it was literally carved out of the side of a mountain. And so the end of the runway was a vertical wall, and on the left side of the runway was another vertical wall, so you can see where they just carved this runway out of the side of the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to come in from the north, and coming in from the north, you had to pass over a village that was downhill from there. Anyway, they had all these people up there on that landing site when we come in, and the first helicopter went in there. He left his ramp open. I left mine closed, but he had his open, and these people, they started piling on this helicopter, and they just couldn't stop them, you know. And that helicopter was, it was full. And they got, they took off with 125 people on, and they went over the end of the runway, and he was going full power. And they got shot at because he couldn't make a turn, so he ended up flying over this village, and somebody from the village was shooting at him. Or one of the engineers got hit in the hand. And anyway, then we went in there and we didn't fly over the village. We turned before we turned short of the village and landed on the runway. And one of our PJs, he was looking out the ramp, checking the right-hand main gear is because we had to turn the helicopter around in this carved out runway. And it wasn't paved or nothing. It was just dirt runway. And we got the helicopter turned around, and the number one PJ, he jumped out, and we had a step there. And they started piling these people on, and I'm trying to helping them, pulling them on the helicopter. You know, there were old men, women, and children mostly. There was no young men. and one of the Laotian Royal Laotian guys, he jumped on top of the drop tank, and I mean he was hitting these people on the head trying to control the crowd, but they just pinned our PJ to the side of the fuselage, and he yelled at me. He says, "When you start leaving," he says, "don't leave me. Drag me with you." And I had a hold of his hand with one hand and pulling these refugees in with the other hand. And we finally got a bunch of. I didn't get a count. We just pulled them on there until the cabin looked like it was full, and we closed up the front door and we made our running takeoff, and we flew something like, I don't know, somewhere west on the western edge of the PDJ, and we landed and dropped them off. Then we went back, we got another load, and this time the right wheel went over the edge of the runway, and the helicopter started tipping over the edge, and Major First, our pilot, he pulled it into a hover, and when he got it in the hover, of course, the dirt and the dust and the pots and pans and parachutes, because they collect these flare chutes that they dropped at night over there. They use those things for different things, and I thought to myself, oh man, we're going to get parachutes down through our rotor blades here, but anyway, you couldn't see anybody for the dust that was kicked up. Finally got the helicopter landed and then started pulling these people in. They had to come around the other side of the helicopter because I left the ramp door closed so they couldn't come in through there. And so we hauled people out of there. We got another 75 or 80 people on. But on the one flight, the PJ, he's getting a head count. He's counting the number of people that we picked up, to kind of get a head count, and I turned around and looked, and here's this little Laotian boy. He's straddling the bottom half of the Dutch door. He's fixing to jump out of the helicopter. We're 4,000 feet in the air, and I yelled at the PJ that was taking a head count. I said, I grabbed that kid. He's going to jump, and the guy that he grabbed this kid and threw him back in the cabin, but yeah. And then we got back to Eudorn there, and they had fire trucks waiting for us, and we they took the fire hoses and just flushed the insides of the helicopter out, because they puked and crapped and peed. And, I mean, it was just, the stench was just something I never smelled before. It was awful. But and then I heard intel later on said that place we landed Halden to, I got overruns. So, and you had to really check the helicopter over, because they found one that they got a styrofoam coffee cup and put a grenade in there and pulled the pin, put it on the shelf between two stringers or between two frames, and it didn't fall off that ledge. If it would have fallen off, that thing would have, the grenade would have dropped out and it would have detonated. But
Yep.
yeah, you have to watch all that stuff over there. Be careful. I marked my field drop tank. I marked my drop tanks when we landed in areas that were considered unfriendly, and we had to sit on the ground a while. I would mark the fuel tank caps, because what they would do is take grenade, wrap a masking tape, duct tape around it, and then they would pull the pin and drop it in the fuel tank, and you get airborne. Adhesive on that duct tape would dissolve, and it would spring loose, and then the grenade would go off inside the fuel tank. So yeah, you had to be careful. So
you had to have your wits about you, didn't you?
Pardon?
You have to have your wits about you, didn't you?
Oh yeah. You couldn't be daydreaming or preoccupied with something. You had to think like what could they do? What are some of the things they could do, and keep that in
Yep.
mind.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the MiG fired a missile. The MiG fired a missile.
Yeah, I had been in country about, let me see, 2 weeks.
Yep.
And on the 28th of January, they had a wild weasel that got shot down on the North Vietnamese, right on the North Vietnamese border. And I don't know if you know what a wild weasel is. It was an F-105G.
Yep.
And they're the ones who went after surface-to-air missiles. The equipment on the radar on the aircraft would pick up the radar for the control radar for these missiles.
That's right.
They would launch a missile and it would follow that track down and hit the radar antenna. And of course, once you destroyed the antenna, the missiles went ballistic. They couldn't be controlled. Anyway, one of these guys got shot down, and anti-aircraft, I guess, shot him down. And the 2 pilots, they bailed out, and then they had their helicopter. They had 2 H-3s up there, and they had 2 53s, and they were orbiting south of the Fish's Mouth.
Yep.
Between what they call Bartholomew Pass and McGee Pass, and they were their H-3s were refueling. The H-53s were flying formation, and of course the A-1s were there too, and escort A-1s. But there were A-1s over there observing the what's going on with the 2 pilots on the ground. They saw them get captured, so they they were H-3s were refueling off the tanker. They had banded MiG calls, but nobody heard them. And MiG came in from behind 10,000 feet, fired 2 atoll missiles, and one went underneath the rotor of the High-Bird, between the 2 helicopters, and then the other one went into the ramp of the Low-Bird, and that one just exploded there. And they recovered 2 guys from that, but that was in 1970. That was over 50 years ago, and they still haven't found the remains of the other ones. They probably never will find them. And the 2 105 pilots, they never showed up either. Evidently they were in Laos, because in Laos they would execute the prisoners. Whereas if there were North Vietnamese there, they would take you in for capture you, because they wanted live prisoners, for dealing.
Yep.
Those, and then
you went through that one where the VVI was going nuts.
Oh yeah, and then we had we were orbiting for a major strike, and a month and a half later, after those MiGs, after the MiG shot that helicopter down, we were orbiting south of Bartholomew Pass, and it was a 4.5 hour strike. I mean, these fighters were going in there one after another, dropping all kinds of ordnance, and they literally pounded that area, because they had moved some anti-aircraft equipment in there, and and they opened up on a C-130 one night, and they figured something's going on up there, and the photo reconnaissance showed that they were hauling in all these anti-aircraft weapons, and so they were going to make a major strike on that route. It's called Route 7, and so we were orbiting south of there, near the egress point. So if a guy got shot down, we could get into him right away. And about 4 hours into the orbit, we were at 6,000 feet. We were low bird, and our high bird was orbiting with us. And I picked up this bandit call, and it was Squid. Squid was north of, as a reference point for MiG bandit calls, because when the Navy, you got MiG calls from the Navy offshore, whose radar could look way over across North Vietnam into Laos, and he picked up some MiGs out of then North Vietnam, and so we But he said the MiGs were at 180, Squid 180 for 30. And I looked at it, I said, we're at 180 for 50, which meant that MiG was 20 miles north of us.
Yeah.
And so I asked the aircraft commander, I said, did you get that MiG call? And he said, no. I said, well, there's a MiG call, and he's close. And so he flipped on his radio that he could hear the MiG call, and he heard the MiG, and the MiG call came again. And this, because when I heard it the first time, I didn't get the distance. Mm-hmm. The radio kind of jammed up. I mean, it was like a static or something. Then the second call, that's where he said 180 Squid, 180 for 30. And my co-pilot, he's got his map on. He's looking, trying to figure out where this is at. And I see the Squid reference, and he's looking at this thing, and I jump up in my seat and I point right on his lap, and I said, he's right there. And that's when our aircraft commander, boy, he just knows that helicopter over. And I was on the number one gun side, and I saw the airspeed go through 210 knots. Vertical velocity was pegged at 6,000 feet a minute. I mean, we were power diving those things, and we leveled off right into the treetops, and our MiG cap came over, and then the MiG broke and went back across to his side of the border, and North Vietnamese side of the border.
Yep.
Because the MiG didn't have that much range. He couldn't stay in the air long. He could do one pass or so, and that was it. He had to, because he wouldn't be able to get. In fact, when we lost that helicopter to that MiG, one of those MiGs didn't make it back. It went down. They think he may have lost control and crashed. Because when he went after that C-130, they think he may have crashed, because after the aircraft that were up there monitoring it, they could hear this call from North Vietnamese. We're calling for this MiG to come back up on air, and he never did.
And he didn't come back up.
There were two MiGs up there that day that the helicopter got shot down.
Okay.
Because they traveled in pairs. That picture you're looking at there, I was in that FAR helicopter on the other side of those A1s. That was in August of 1970. Those were our two A1 escort, the A1s flying with us. And the Captain Thompson was in the helicopter that was on this side of those A1s. And he snapped that picture. I'm in the doorway of that helicopter on the far side there. You can barely see. I had a camouflage helmet on, but that orbit, we were orbiting the Rooster Tail there. That was that southern panhandle orbit, and we'd orbit there for we're 10,000 feet there, and so you can see those A1s. They fly right along with us, and those A1s could stay up for about 6.5, 7 hours. They had good loader time, So, but that was a lot of times on our orbits, on our afternoon orbits.
Yep.
We A1s would fly around with us, and we had one come up there one day because they got bored flying around, and one of them came up there one day, and he was beside us. I mean, he was right out. I think his wing was under our rotor blades. He was that close. And he said, he asked us how fast we were going. And we said, well, we're indicating 110 knots. And he said, I guess I could hang here with you for a while. So we're flying along, and then our pilot, he beat it back to 105 knots, and the A1 slowed down, and he was hanging right there with us, and you understand that there's a lot of ordnance hanging underneath that A1.
Yep.
And so he beat the airspeed back to 100 knots, and then you can see the A1's flaps start coming down, and the prop taking a bigger bite of air, and so we're floating along there at 100 knots, and then he beat it down to 95 knots. and poof, that guy's landing gears came out, and I mean, he was sitting there, and the airplane was just on the verge of a stall. I mean, he was really working it, and then so the aircraft commander called me and says, well, he says, let's see you do this. He shoved the stick side of a helicopter, went into a bank, and he started the bank. He stalled out, and as he was going down, he was pulling his flaps up and his gear up and all that. And we turned left, then we turned right. So we were watching him going down.
Yep.
And I mean, he was going straight down, and we could see him pull out because you could see the moisture contrails off his wingtips. Beautiful arc, and he'd climb up, and then he'd go way out there, he'd disappear, and then about 10, 15 minutes later, he'd come again, fly alongside of us, because they just got bored up there. They wanted something to do besides, fly and burning holes in the sky.
Sure. I reckon.
Oh yeah, we had a guy come up there one day, and he pulls up alongside of us, and it's an H model, like those are H models you saw in there. And he said, "What do you think of my co-pilot?" And we thought, co-pilot in an H model? You had a co-pilot in the H model. So we looked over there, and he's got this stuffed dummy of Snoopy sitting behind his seat. Here's Snoopy back there with the goggles on and all this stuff. And we had one guy come up there one day, pull up alongside of us. In fact, I think I got a picture of it, an 8x11 picture of it. And he's got his canopy slid back, and he's got this World War II helmet on with the goggles, that they used in World War II in the fighters, this guy, he had a scarf, silk scarf. He threw the silk scarf out there, and he's flapping in the breeze. Yeah, those A1 drivers, they were characters, but we really depended on them on the rescue missions to give us all the protection they could do it. I saw A1 on one mission I was on. I thought it was ground fire at first, but he dumped all his CBU. Those pods. There's tubes on each wing. There's two pods of 6 tubes. Yep. I think these tubes are about 10 to 12 feet long, and they're about 3 inches in diameter. And these tubes are filled with CBU. And there's a compressed air bottle in the front of these tubes. And he can when he discharges them, it pushes them out the back of those tubes, so they free fall behind the airplane. And these things, when they hit the ground, they bounce up about 4 feet, then they explode. Well, these things have a lethal meter, 50 meter cross. Anything within 50 meters of them will get, pretty badly or killed.
Yep.
And I saw these flashes, these explosions just rippling across the ground. I said, "Man, look at that ground." Then I saw this A1 pulling off, and he dumped all his CBU. And he covered that CBU covered area of about 4 football fields in less than 5 seconds.
Sure.
The CBU just rippled across, and I mean, when those things went off, there was like a big hand grenade. And they would shred leaves, trees, everything. They're just a shrapnel coming off of these things. And he dumped his whole load there. And if there was anybody alive in that area, they would take them out,
Or you'd be getting fried.
Yeah.
This was at Yubon, Thailand. The Laotians were flying T-28s, AT-28s of Yubon, Thailand. They'd fly over to Cambodia or southern Laos, and one day this AT-28 came back, and they noticed that the guns and all the ordnance was gone, and there was mud and debris up in the wheel wells, so they figured something's going on here, and So the next day or day or two later, it took off again. Well, this time the Thai wing commander of the air base, it was an American wing commander. There was a Thai wing commander, and he sent another T-28 out to find out what was going on with this T-28. Well, this guy was landing somewhere in Laos, and the VC or the North Vietnamese come out there and collect all the ammo and all that off the rockets or whatever off the airplane, because see, they could shoot our 50 calibers in their 51s, but we couldn't shoot their 51s in our 50s. You know, so they could make use of that ammunition. So anyway, the guy that followed him, he called back and he said, this guy's unloading ordnance and that into Laos or to the enemy anyway. And so the airplane, came back and landed. He's taxiing in. The Thai wing commander pulled right up in front of his airplane with his staff car, and he got out, and the guy in the T-28 stopped, and wing commander went around behind the wing, crawled up on the wing, come in there, took his 45 out, and plugged him right there in the cockpit. He just shot it right there, and so and the thing about what it is the VC probably got a hold of this guy's family.
Yep.
Said, if you don't do this, we're going to kill your family. A lot of that went on over there like that. They would force families to do things they didn't want to do. So it was.
Well,
I kind of felt sorry for some of those Vietnamese and the families.
We've been talking now for about an hour, so I've got a fair bit of footage there. Thanks so much for sharing your experience with us.
Yeah, you're quite welcome.
And it's great to hear stories, and stories are absolutely precious because it gives people, tells them the truth of what really happened over there, and it keeps your memories and alive, and people can appreciate what you did.
Yeah, and we did, we did more than combat rescue type missions. We did life-saving civilian rescues, stuff like that. So there was a lot of humanitarian work that we did over there as well. So.
Oh, of course, and even today, the military go out and assist people in earthquakes and floods and stuff. It's not all. It's not all guns and bombs. It's
oh no.
But anyway, my folks on my channel really appreciate your service and appreciate your time that you've given us. And on behalf of everyone, thank you so much.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Good talking to you.
No worries, mate. Thanks so much, and we'll speak again soon.
Okay.
Hey Stan, what's the history of this one? What's the history of this one here?
Well, this is the newest H-53 series that the Air Force had.
Okay.
1973 was the last year.
Okay.
They bought them and they were stationed here at Eglin.
Yeah.
This one, I believe, was one of the aircraft that went to South America to recover all those bodies from the Jonestown.
Yeah.
And they flew them down there by way of Puerto Rico and then into South America.
Uh-huh.
But after that, they were converted over to Pablo configuration, and then finally to the MH-53J, which is a Pablo 3-4.
This is where you were at, right here, right? The flight engineer station?
No, the flight engineer station was on the right, in the middle.
Okay.
Between the pilot seat.
Okay.
And most of the time, I was up there between the pilot and co-pilot.
Okay.
But when we had gunnery and hoist,
okay.
that's when that was my station when we did hoist and gunnery work.
Okay.
That cable there is
okay.
248 feet long.
Okay.
And there were times over there in Southeast Asia when we used every bit of that up because there's an auto stop on there. It won't let it go down there.
Right, for the jungle penetrator,
So we had to lower the helicopter into the trees.
Yeah.
Got treetops and that. to get it on the ground and get the pilot picked up. Those big filters there you see up there, that's air filters. They call them engineer particle separator, or EAPS.
Okay. EAPS system. Yeah.
Yeah, and in forward flight, those doors are open, but when you come into a hover over the trees, those doors close, and then that protrusion out the back of that, that's a big three-phase blower.
Okay.
Creates a low pressure in that chamber there where the air goes into those little round circles.
Okay.
Those are called stratotubes. The air takes up a certain cyclonic motion.
Wow.
The dirt is thrown to the outer edges of those tubes, and the air goes into the middle.
Okay.
So everything, including salt, water, everything is sucked out of the air going into the engine. So when them doors are closed, nothing but air goes into that engine.
So this one you flew in Da Nang or in NKP?
No, I flew on the H-53 at the Udon, Thailand.
This one?
No, this is a 73 model. This came about after the war.
After the war. Okay.
This is a 70.
Stan, what can you tell me about the refueling probe?
Yeah, the refueling probe is pushed out by engine bleed air. This probe comes out to about another 10, 12 feet. Because they're refueling the air, and you can take on about 5,000 to 6,000 pounds in about less than 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay.
It fills the drops and the mains up. Both engines feed out of the main tank, so all the fuel in the drop tank is pumped into the mains before it's used.
And your office was on the other side of this helicopter, right? You're the flight engineer?
Mine was right behind the throttles on my position, crew position was right between the pilot and the co-pilot.
Okay.
Just aft of them. Because on the Pavlo bird, which is the Pavlo bird here, the first engineer carried 2 engineers. The first engineer took care of the GPS, the FLIR, and run the checklist for the pilots because they were so overtasked in the cockpit that they required that second engineer to help them out.
And here's where you used to work right here, right?
They went on the other side. This is the number 1 position, number 2 position on the other side. That was my position on number 2.
What was it like to fire the G miniguns?
Oh, you have a lot of fun.
You even got your shirt on today.
Yeah.
G minigun.
I once emptied a 3,000 round canister at 45 seconds.
Wow.
And the gun didn't slow down or nothing. Not a misfire. It fired every round.
And these drop tanks, what can you tell me about these? How many pounds?
These are 650 gallons, so you're looking at about close to 4,000 pounds apiece.
And these are the ones where you were riddled at one time when you were at that karst.
Yeah, the one.
They shot it all to
the
pieces.
one on the other side had a hole, about a 6-inch hole in the back, and it was spewing fuel up through the rotor blades, coming back down behind the helicopter and coming inside the ramp.
Wow.
Because there's a low pressure area behind there. Couldn't close the ramp because the hydraulics had been shot out.
Wow. But all in all, it was a good helicopter to fly in.
Oh yeah.
Loved it. Durable, take you where you have to go.
Took a lot of punishment. We had one that got hit by a 37 millimeter, blew a 4x4 hole in the belly, and it flew back. Another one took a series of 23 millimeter rounds in the back in the aft cabin there, cut hydraulic lines, started a fire, and burned through the metal or the skin, and you could see daylight through the skin. You could see the drive shaft, which is normally a covered drive shaft tunnel. It burned all that away, but it flew back 60 miles back to NKP, and they ordered another tail from the ramp back from Sikorsky, and they flew it to Thailand in a C5, and they had that thing flying again 9 months later.
Okay, Stan, what are we looking at here?
Well, first off, this is typical of the survival vest that we wore over there.
Okay.
Our crew members wore over there. It consisted of first aid kit, Mark 13 flares, 2 PRC radios, blood chit, maps, the extra batteries for the radio. That's a King Arthur, what they call the King Arthur vest.
Okay.
Armor plating. It would stop a bullet. That's a party shirt that the guys have made up there for their Sawadee parties.
Sawadee parties, yeah.
Yes. And they would have patches made up by local tailors over there, and they would put these patches on. your Mark 13 flare,
Okay.
and that would put out the crimson red smoke to mark your location
Okay.
in the jungle. All pilots carried those things. That's a medical kit. PJ carried those medical kits. Force penetrator.
Yeah. How does that work again?
Your seats there could lift. Had 3 seats. They were spring loaded up. You pull them down. They'd latch down, and you pull out a strap, put the strap around you, and you could lift 3 people with that. But you could put down lower 2 people with that.
And what's that one over there?
That's the same thing, except it doesn't have that's the early version of the force penetrator.
Okay. And the radio. The radio. What is that?
These are the PRC radios. We had the PRC 90s over there, and we carried 2 of those.
Okay.
In case one failed, you still have communication with your so that you could talk to rescue aircraft.